in what is the third adaptation of the novel, we get something different when it comes to Let the Right One In. Because this isn't a movie, but a series, there's a chance to show more heart when it comes to the young vampire and what becomes a best friend, and the adults feel less a means to an end, and more so characters who can stand on their own. To provide a quick summary of episode 1, pretty much what was shown is that vampires exist. There's not a huge amount of them, and it's not fully clear what kind of powers they may have compared to shows like Interview with the Vampire. But what we do know is that they exist, there's not a whole lot of them, and we're introduced to 2 of them. The first one we're introduced to is named Peter, and he is the son of a rather rich doctor named Arthur, who, because of his issuance of painkillers en masse, ruined his practice, and thanks to pancreatic cancer, it seems like Arthur's at the end of his life. But after his son got attacked by a vampire and became one, he has mostly dedicated the rest of his life in order to find the cure, and he seemed to be close, but unfortunately, he's just not there yet. So he calls in his daughter Claire, who's a doctor in her own right, and he hopes that she'll pick up where he left off, for despite how much Claire doesn't like, if not outright hates her father, she did raise and loves Peter, so there is the hope that despite whatever ethics she may have to deal with in order to get Peter to be human again, she'll do it in order to save the boy's life. Now, alongside Peter, we have Eleanor, who unfortunately her mother passed away in ways that aren't made clear in this episode. But at the very least, she has her father Mark, who probably for the last 10 years, just like Peter, in Arthur that is, he has searched for ways in order to find a cure, but unlike Arthur, Mark is not a trained doctor. He's a former chef who doesn't have the network, but he does have, he has his ear to the streets to try to find similar cases of people being attacked by what may be vampires, to hopefully find either another vampire or else the one that did this to his daughter and turned her into a vampire. But after all these years of chasing stories, what Mark is now doing is he's taking her back to New York City, Manhattan specifically, and he's trying to present the idea that he wants to give her normalcy. Now, for normalcy, one of the things that are required is Mark getting a job again. And so he decides he's going to check out Zeke, his former best friend, and work at his restaurant as he used to when Zeke possibly started the restaurant years ago. Now, Zeke and Mark don't have the best relationship because Zeke feels that Mark stole his girl, who was Eleanor's mom. But it seems that as of now, he's willing to let bygones be bygones since Mark is still talented. Eleanor is his goddaughter, and as much as things are still difficult between them, at the same time, Zeke is trying to work past it. It's just, the history is a lot to try to deal with, especially when Mark just comes out of nowhere, asks for a favor to get a job, and a lot of things still haven't changed. But setting aside Zeke and Mark's relationship, probably the thing that matters the most to Eleanor is that for this normalcy thing, it's not just Mark getting a job or else trying to have like family time, like taking her to a Hubble telescope exhibit, but also him not shutting down the idea of her hanging out with the kid next door named Isaiah. Now, Isaiah's a bit of a weird kid. He's into magic, mostly like coins, cards, sleight of hand type of magic. And to make matters interesting, his mom Naomi is a cop. And his dad Frank is a former drug dealer / drug addict who actually still deals drugs, but more on that in a second. That relationship between Eleanor and Isaiah is going to be likely the driving force of the show because Eleanor hasn't had a normal life in years. Isaiah hasn't had friends, has been bullied for most of his life. His dad is in and out of the picture, and his mom being a cop. You can imagine that for the most part she's working more than like really like staying on him and being supportive. So Eleanor being someone who's a bit weird herself, it's a godsend for him. Him being accepting of what makes her different is a godsend for her. So it seems like they may have a beautiful relationship. At least as long as Isaiah never learns that Mark killed his father because his father was dealing drugs that made people have the characteristic of vampires. And not only did Mark kill Frank, but he also drained him of his blood, which Eleanor has drank. So there's a little bit of a dark connection already starting off. So the top tier highlight is Isaiah and Eleanor's chemistry and also just their compatibility in scenes. For, as just noted, we're having two kids who have very abnormal lives. Eleanor, of course, more so because she's a vampire, but also Isaiah, who, played by Ian Foreman, is just that level of like sad but adorable because you can see he really tries to make friends, but not in a way that makes it so that he's compromising who he is in the process. He's not giving up magic just to make some friends. Instead, you can see when he's in the cafeteria, he'll go to the popular kids, he'll go to the weird kid with the trench coat, and hope that, they'll see something in him that for whatever reason people are not recognizing. And when Eleanor recognizes that, and she not only accepts him, but she kind of likes what he does, that's the thing that he needed. That's the lifeline. Not his mom trying to tolerate his magic thing while fearing that he's going to be bullied, but someone who actually seems to get it, like it, appreciate it, and wants to see more of it. And then, of course, for Eleanor, one of the things for vampires in this show is that their eyes have this weird kind of glow when their light hits them. And being that Isaiah's not scared of her, not treating her weird, but he sees her as cool as she sees some of his magic, she gets what her father can't give her. Because one of the things they have in common is both of their parents don't fully accept or like what they do. For Naomi, she doesn't really get magic, thinks it's kind of corny, and is something that's going to definitely get her son bullied. And when it comes to Mark, he can't really stand to look at his daughter when she feeds or how she handles that because she kind of gets in a feral state when she feeds. And this is despite him having to kill people half the time in order to get the food. But even though Isaiah hasn't seen that side of her, at the very least, he, in terms of the introduction of her being different, wasn't scared of. And I think that is something that will allow her to kind of be vulnerable with him in a way that she hasn't been able to be vulnerable with anybody, including her dad, possibly ever. So the second highlight is just that the adults are an ends to a means when it comes to this show, because in the original movie, which I haven't seen in forever, and then in the Chloe Grace Moretz version, which also haven't seen in forever, you can tell it wasn't really about the adults. The adults were the people who were either victims, who was helping the vampire child, and that's pretty much the highs and lows of their characters. With the way that this show is made, it wants to seemingly expand on that idea, and not to keep comparing it to Interview with a Vampire, but you can see it wants to give you more than what we've gotten before. For example, Mark is not just Eleanor's father. He is shown to be someone who's a former chef, someone who had a complicated relationship with his best friend because Eleanor's mother fell in love with him instead of Zeke. And on top of that, they don't just show them to be people who are of Latino, Hispanic origin, but actually have been speaking Spanish and maybe might show more of their culture beyond just speaking the language, which helps make this show different than the past two iterations, which were, the first one was Swedish, the last one was American, and while of course there's a good chance Mark and Eleanor are American by nationality, they also are presenting you something more than just, diversity for the sake of diversity, in terms of having a different skin tone and look, but not bringing all that else that you would expect to see come from an actor who looks like them, for lack of a better way of putting it. Then when you break down Naomi's situation, you have what, granted, kind of has that Shonda Rhimes Reasonable Doubt vibe in terms of someone in the legal profession having a bit of a messy relationship with a criminal at that. But when you factor in her relationship with her son and how she kind of doesn't get him and he can definitely feel that, when you factor in her job, which is having a murder investigation with somebody who's brutally murdering people, and how she eventually is going to probably end up on a collision course with Mark, You can see a whole separate life that's been carved out that really has little to do with Eleanor in some ways. And why Isaiah is part of her life, it's not her whole life. She has so much more she has going on. And then with, of course, Frank dying in this episode, even though she probably may not understand, she may not know that at least for 1 or 2 more episodes when they discover the body. You can tell that that's going to possibly trigger things as she starts to not only recollect about their relationship, but even maybe try to navigate why she got with Frank, the back and forth, and even why she hasn't moved on from him. So the last highlight is just feeling that Office family may not be the tokens that they come off as. Now, generally speaking, when we talk about tokens, it's usually that one Asian, Black, Latino / possibly Hispanic family or person within a white show. In the case of Let the Right One In, I would see Office family almost like Louis Anderson supposedly was when it came to Coming to America, where a party feels like, I get why you're here, but all things considered, did it have to be you? Because it would have been interesting to see someone who, in terms of Office family, was Asian, whether you want to talk about South Asian in terms of India, Pakistan, that area, Northeast when it comes to China, Japan, Korea, maybe Central Eurasia in terms of Iran, Saudi Arabia, that area. We could have got something like that, and being that it's New York, we would have finally had a show where it's like, yes, white people exist, of course, but at the same time, it's also, when it comes to New York, it's kind of like an immigrant and diversity mecca. But it is what it is. And I'm doing my best to kind of like take the optimism that I have for Eleanor's family and also for Isaiah's family and put it on to Office, because look at it this way. Office is shown to be a very complicated man in terms of he was a good provider, but he was a terrible father. But as he got older and also Peter got inflicted with vampirism, it seems he tried to become a better father and not just be someone who was throwing money at issues. And since he's doing all this different type of studies, and who knows, maybe this whole painkiller thing was him testing on people in order to try to find a cure for his son, that could be intriguing to watch. And then when you throw Claire into the mix, there's always a need to question, would she go as far as her father in order to find a cure for her little brother who she practically raised as a son? And in thinking that, and also combining that eventually, like all things with the show, Eleanor and Mark are going to probably be on a collision course with them. Never mind, we also learned at the end of the episode that Peter and Eleanor went to the same camp, but maybe they both got attacked. Either way you look at it, there is potentially a lot of opportunities for this storyline to go better than for most tokens it would. And I'm trying to hope for the best, not expect the worst, but, keep in the back of my head that this could have been such a good moment for another culture of color. Yet, be it casting, marketing, or maybe Showtime, they figured we're taking a property that's already based off of something that is very white, giving it to a Latinx, Hispanic family, adding in a Black family, so I guess they figured we can't completely add color to this and not have one notable white character / family. Overall, when it comes to the first episode of Let the Right One In, I feel like between this and Yellow Jackets, Showtime may not have its name put out there like HBO and Netflix in terms of quality, but the consistency that's starting to come about is really making me think that people need to start putting respect on Showtime's name. And this is just another show, just like The Chi, that I feel is going to really make this network feel slept on in a way that's almost criminal.